we were saying just before we started that £150, it depends very much who you are and if you really are on benefits and the rest of it. Every little helps. But although that's great for disabled people, it's only one tiny piece of a big jigsaw that will be unfolding over the next few days.
It will. On Friday, Alistair, we expect to have confirmed that the average household dual gas and electricity fuel bill will be capped at £2,500. Now, how do you cap an average? That's because the average, the unit of electricity price is capped. So if you use more, if you're a bigger household, it'll be more than £2,500. If you use less, it will be significantly less. Huge confusion about that across the media. Very few people bother to explain it, but of course we do here on GB News.
I got a nightmare feeling that there are folk out there who think, whoever they are, they're not going to have to pay more than £2,500.
Yeah, that's right.
Simply not.
And there are other folk thinking, well, they'll only be paying only £1,000, but they think they're going to pay £2,500, even though they don't even put the heater on. So what's going to happen on what we know from today, as Anna Riley reported there, is that these £150 disability living allowance top-ups are being distributed. From today, everyone, the 6 million people roughly who are eligible, should have that extra payment in their accounts by the end of the month. So says the Department for Work and Pensions. But of course, this comes on top of a whole load of other assistance and benefits. Many, even combined, some people may think it's inadequate. We've got means-tested benefits coming through, top-ups from Rishi Sunak's last budget in the spring. God, that seems like years ago.
In May.
Yeah, back when we were lads. On top of that, though, you've also got the energy support package coming through. It's not just about that cap for households and maybe for businesses. We discussed that a few hours ago, didn't we? It's also a £400 grant, a one-off. This is money for you. You don't have to pay it back for all households. That's controversial because even well-off households get that. On top of that, there's on average £650 of assistance for fuel bills for families qualifying for certain benefits, like means-tested benefits, housing benefit and so on. And then in addition to that, there may be other benefits around the edges. But even with all these benefits, it's going to cost a lot of money and people are still going to be paying a lot more than they normally do for their fuel.
And she is widely trailed anyway that she will cut taxes, or Kwasi Kwarteng in her name, will be cutting taxes on Friday. The Prime Minister says there is no doubt that cutting taxes will grow the economy. Is it that certain?
It isn't certain at all. There's also, it isn't certain the impact on the public finances of cutting taxes. Some people would argue that you actually generate more tax if you cut the tax rate because there's more activity. Others would argue the opposite. And this is at a time when interest rates on government debt are going up a lot because the government's borrowing heavily. It has to pay more for that borrowing. And as taxpayers, we all have to pay that back to those businesses and pension funds and often overseas entities that have invested in that government debt. So there's an awful lot of uncertainty. And this is going to be a very, very significant budget, even though it's a mini budget, as the government says we must call it. We've had controversy, haven't we, because the head of the Treasury Select Committee, the chair, Mel Stride, very respected Labour MP, he says quite reasonably...
Conservative MP.
Tory MP. He says quite reasonably that the government should be saying to the Office for Budget Responsibility, put out these estimates, show us, independently if you think our financial models are working and if we're being responsible. By calling it a fiscal event / mini budget, the OBR isn't statutorily obliged to produce those forecasts. The reality is there's huge uncertainty. Just one little scintilla of uncertainty I'd put in here. We are seeing in the newspapers and elsewhere a lot of estimates that this massive energy support package is going to cost the same as furlough. Furlough cost about £70 billion, 70,000 million. This could cost 100 or 150 billion. Yes, it could. The cost could spiral out of control. But if wholesale energy prices come down, the cost of delivering energy at that capped rate becomes a lot less. And wholesale energy prices, gas on Western European markets, is actually down around 40% over the last few weeks. So all this is in the balance. There's a lot of risk, there's a lot of uncertainty, and there's going to be a great deal of controversy around Friday's mini budget.
Yes. The Office of Budget Responsibility, independent, impartial, which Mel is talking about, saying that they should cast an eye over this thing. And we know from other think tanks out there, not least the Institute of Fiscal Studies.
Very respected.
Very respected, very independent, all have their doubts. The trusts can come back and say, but that's the old Treasury orthodoxy. This is a brand new game. We're doing something very, very different. And therefore, there's no point in saying what might the economy look like in 12 months because it's going to be so fundamentally different. Are they trying to get away with murder or have they got a point?
I think there's certainly a debate to be had. You know, I know being an economist who's often, you know, criticised in the public realm, the IFS, the OBR, you know, I know all the people at the top of them, they're decent people, decent economists in the Treasury, but they do have a way of thinking, and it is an orthodox way of thinking, and they often make huge mistakes, it has to be said. You know, back in the 80s, Reaganomics, you know, tore up the economic textbooks because he was cutting taxes and getting more tax revenue through the door. And I think that is part of the inspiration for what Liz Truss is saying. On the other hand, it is a risk. Some people would say, even though this government policy is risky, borrowing loads of money in order to provide energy support for households and indeed for firms, to do nothing would be riskier still.
It's that weird coincidence as well, isn't it, between the political calendar, the election cycle, and the economic calendar and economic cycle.
Well, in my view, when economics gets really tasty, it just trumps all politics. It totally upends politics. It did when...
Was that unintended?
But does any leader, Prime Minister, want economics to be tasty? Because isn't that dangerous territory if economics is tasty?
And I use that word advisedly. You know, the politics is going to get really quite confrontational in the weeks and months to come, driven by the economy. Industrial relations is going to get confrontational as these pay review body assessments come through.
But also, as Nick Thomas-Symonds, the Shadow International Trade Secretary, was saying to Gloria and me just a little while ago, what you said in the past is also going to get very, very tasty. And he said Truss promised absolutely that there would be a trade deal with the United States. Truss now says there probably won't be. And he quoted Liz Truss as having said, it's worth 50 billion quid. So if you don't get a trade deal with the Americans, then you lose £50 billion.
It's right. Liz Truss understandably said that when she was the Trade Secretary, when she was going around the world securing a lot of trade deals for the UK that a lot of people said she couldn't secure. And for the most part, she secured them. Of course, keeping on with the food analogies, a trade deal with the US is the big enchilada because the US is, even without a trade deal, still our biggest single country trading partner by a long way. And we haven't had a trade deal with them for more than 50 years. Why? Because the EU doesn't have a trade deal with the US. If we do get a trade deal, it's a bonus. It's not necessary to keep trading with the United States. We trade massively with the US. That will continue. That point isn't made nearly enough.